The wheels touched down in Calgary just after sunset, the sky painted in long bands of gold and violet. I stepped off the plane expecting a colder version of home, same language, similar stores, just with more snow. But right there in the airport, something felt off. Or rather, gentler. A woman behind me bumped into my suitcase and immediately said, "Oh, sorry about that," not with annoyance, but with genuine concern. The security officer smiled, made a bit of small talk about the Flames game, and handed me my passport back with a quiet "have a good one," no side-eye, no barked instructions, just softness. I remember standing in the arrivals hall, surrounded by people speaking English, yes, but with a rhythm that felt calmer. There were kids running in socks, not leashed to their parents in fear. An elderly couple was sitting on a bench, casually sipping Tim Hortons coffee, and no one seemed rushed. That's when the first crack of culture shock hit. Nothing looked unusual, but everything felt a little too relaxed. My Uber ride into the city was where it really began. The driver, a soft-spoken guy in his 30s, asked where I was from. When I said Boston, he laughed lightly. "Welcome to the slow lane," he said. "But the view's better." We talked about winters, his stories of plugging in his truck at night, my shock at how prepared everyone seemed for the snow. "Here, cold isn't an emergency," he said. "It's just Tuesday." The next morning, I walked into a grocery store for some basics, and that's when the everyday strangeness started stacking up. Milk wasn't in gallons, it was in bags. Bags. I stared at the floppy plastic like I was being pranked. The cashier asked if I had brought my own bags and, when I said no, politely pointed out that plastic ones cost extra. "It's a green thing," she added kindly. I paid in rainbow-colored bills that felt like Monopoly money, the coins heavier than I expected. There was French everywhere on cereal boxes, shampoo bottles, even the receipts. Pay no chocolate wasn't just a fancy label here. It was the norm. Later that afternoon, I tried to jaywalk across a quiet street out of habit. A car had already stopped to let me cross. No honking, no hand gestures, just a wave. The driver even smiled. In Boston, I'd be dodging traffic and middle fingers, but the most surreal moment. Standing at a coffee shop line, I noticed no one was on their phones. People just stood, waiting, chatting, looking around. One older man struck up a conversation with me about the weather, then handed me a flyer for a local art walk happening that weekend. "You should go," he said. "It's small but good." That night, lying in a borrowed bed at my urban, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning quietly above me and thought, this place isn't weird. I am. I was used to rush, to friction, to assuming that everyone had an angle. But here, the strange part wasn't the language or the food. It was the kindness, the patience, the steady hum of a place not in a hurry to prove anything. And I was only one day in. It didn't take long before the quiet differences started rewriting my daily rhythm. In the States, I was used to grabbing breakfast on the run, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, already fielding emails by the time I reached the train. But in Canada, mornings unfolded differently. There was this slowness, not laziness, but intentional calm. My second day in Calgary, I stepped into a Tim Hortons around 8:30, expecting a frantic line of commuters and barked orders. Instead, people waited in a gentle queue, nodding to each other, exchanging actual good mornings with the staff. Nobody rushed. The barista asked about my day like she meant it, then offered me a loyalty card with a quiet smile. Even walking to work, I felt like I had stepped into a different emotional climate. Drivers actually yielded at crosswalks without hesitation. Pedestrians didn't sprint, they strolled. At first, it made me feel late all the time. But the weird thing, I was just used to running on American urgency. The office culture was the next wave of adjustment. I was working remotely from a Canadian co-working space, mostly filled with freelancers and nonprofit folks. On my first day, I arrived early, laptop open, earbuds in, ready to grind. People trickled in around 9:30, greeting each other warmly, setting up slowly. No one had that edge of tension I was used to, the American performative hustle. There were no loud conference calls, no one bragging about pulling all-nighters. Instead, people left on time. And not sheepishly, they just packed up, waved, and left. At 5:01, the place emptied like clockwork. I remember one moment in particular. I stayed a bit late to finish a presentation. A woman at the next table gently asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded, confused. She smiled. It's a nice evening out there. Hope you're not stuck too long." That would have never happened back home. There, staying late made you look dedicated. Here, it made you look out of sync. Evenings brought more subtle recalibrations. I was invited to a neighborhood potluck by a local couple I'd met through the co-working space. I expected polite small talk and maybe a quick exit after dessert. What I got was something else entirely. People brought homemade dishes, nothing fancy, just thoughtful. Someone handed me a plate and said, "No pressure to chat. Just glad you came." Nobody dominated the conversation. Nobody asked what I did for work until an hour in. Instead, we talked about hiking trails, winter tires, and whether ketchup chips were actually good. One man helped me clear dishes and told me how, after moving here from Philadelphia 10 years ago, he had to relearn what friendliness meant. In the US, people are friendly, sure, he said, but there's always a line like, "This far and no further." Here, it's quieter, but once you're in, you're in. No pretense, but that depth comes with its own kind of challenge. Despite the warm welcomes, I still felt like an outsider in certain ways. At the co-working space, people were kind but didn't immediately invite me out for drinks or lunch. There was no forced socializing, no icebreakers or group texts, just slow, steady politeness. Back home, friendships often formed fast, loud, open, and full of plans. Here, it felt like I was being observed first. Not suspiciously, just cautiously. People wanted to see if I'd stick around before opening up. I'll admit there were moments when that patience felt like distance. I caught myself wondering if I'd ever truly fit in. But then, after about 2 weeks, one of the coworkers invited me to a trivia night. "We've got a spot if you're free," she said casually, almost like it wasn't a big deal. But for me, it was. And when I showed up that night, one of the guys handed me a pen and said, "You're American, right? You'll crush the geography round." Everyone laughed. It wasn't mocking. It was inclusion, messy, real, affectionate. That's when I realized this country's strangeness isn't in its systems. It's in its softness. It's in spoken rules about space, trust, and modesty. It doesn't grab you. It lets you arrive. And slowly, I was beginning to. It was my 4th week in Canada when I finally understood how deeply the culture had started to seep into me, not just the habits, but the mindset. I was walking home after a late movie on a cold Tuesday night. The sidewalks were dusted with snow, the streetlights casting soft gold pools across the pavement. A couple passed by, holding hands, and hurried. No one crossed the street to avoid me. No one eyed me warily. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't scanning. I wasn't clutching my keys or keeping my headphones low to stay alert. I was just walking, breathing, safe. That emotional unburdening, that subtle absence of fear, had become my new normal. It snuck up on me. I stopped double-checking if I locked the door every hour. I stopped assuming everyone around me might be a threat. I even forgot to tiptoe through the mental calculations I usually ran every time I met someone new. Are they genuine? What do they want? What's the angle? The angle here was there was no angle. Even small acts of trust hit differently. One afternoon I left my laptop at a coffee shop table while I went to the bathroom. In New York, that would be a gamble. Here, I came back and found someone had neatly tucked my charging cable out of the walkway. Another day, I saw a toddler wandering in a bookstore while her dad browsed a few feet away, not panicking, not hovering, just trusting that she'd be okay. And she was. It wasn't that Canada was perfect. I started to see that too. The healthcare system had its delays. Not everyone was warm, and winters were brutal. But even the flaws felt human, honest. There was an undercurrent of shared responsibility. Like everyone here had quietly agreed, life's hard enough. Let's not make it harder for each other. Back in the States, I had worn my ambition like armor. Every interaction was subtly competitive. "What do you do? What's your title? How big is your hustle?" Here, no one asked me about my job for weeks. When I mentioned it, people nodded politely but were more interested in what hikes I'd tried or what I thought of local beer. I stopped performing productivity. I stopped needing to prove I belonged. That shift didn't happen overnight. It took letting go. Letting go of the reflex to rush, the instinct to measure worth in output, the habit of seeing strangers as obstacles. Canada taught me to pause, to listen, to stand in a long coffee line without checking my phone because the quiet was enough. And somewhere in all that stillness, I found a version of myself I didn't know I was missing. Leaving was harder than I expected. I packed my things with a kind of reverence, folding each coat and scarf like I was preserving a piece of that calm. At the airport, as I waited at the gate, an elderly man dropped his boarding pass. A teenager nearby picked